The land down under has given humanity gifts in forms of blessings and curses. If it isn't the gift of animals and creepy cruelties that kill you in your sleep if given the chance, it's the gift of political bloopers. Many times in global and Aussie politics has there been moments where politicians, or even the leader of the country, has reminded us that there's still some human left in that cold, heartless flesh of theirs. As this is more Australian themes, a famous example of a political blooper being that time Scott Morrison shat himself in a McDonald's, and still denies it ever happened. Or what about that time a Prime Minister straight up disappeared without a trace? Sounds weird, you know, the most important man in the country just happens to vanish and no one knows where he went. This man was Harold Holt. So let's talk about his disappearance, shall we? Harold Holt, the 17th Prime Minister of Australia, led the country in the late 60s from 1966 to his disappearance in 1967, serving nearly 2 years in office. Ignoring most of his political career and stances on real-world views, Holt had a very interesting hobby in water sports. He was a big fan of spearfishing and other such wet activities like freediving and snorkeling. He would typically do these hobbies while he was away on holiday to get away from all that political business. In spite of Holt's companions knowing he was strong in the water, they still knew his hobbies were dangerous, especially for someone who's in a position to lead the country, and confronted him about it. One time his press secretary got involved in telling him off and Holt just replied, "Look, Tony, what are the odds of a Prime Minister being drowned or taken by a shark?" Holt almost ate those words as he almost drowned months before his disappearance at Cheviot Beach in Victoria. Lucky for him though, he was saved by some of his diving companions who were with him at the time, supposedly almost drowning from a leaking snorkel. Further on to supposedly state that that was the closest time he's ever been to drowning at sea. There was another instance where he spent almost half an hour trying to chase a coral trail up the Great Barrier Reef on his birthday, but left after his old man bones got the better of him. On the day of his disappearance, he had the whole day laid out ahead of him to travel to Point Nepean, go for a barbecue lunch and spend the afternoon spearfishing. His road trip would involve him, his neighbour and her daughter, and 2 family friends. They first set out to Point Nepean to watch Alec Rose travel the world single-handedly and was heading through Point Nepean to Point Phillip. But the gang didn't stick around for too long since they could just about see Rose in his boat. Plus, the Aussie sun isn't too friendly down there, so they got going soon after. Before they headed back for lunch, Harold suggested and convinced the group about heading to Cheviot Beach because he wanted to cool off and work up his hunger for the Aussie-styled barbecue. Being a hotspot for spearfishing and almost drowning, he knew the whole area like the back of his hand, so he claimed. The water at the beach was very rough, with currents and strong waves crashing towards the beach. Holt didn't hesitate to jump into the water, same thing with Stuart, but the others chose to stay on the beach for their own safety. While Stuart stayed close to the shore, Holt swam out further, and soon enough he got pulled out further by the currents, and then he just vanished under the waves. Everyone at the beach called out to him, but nothing. It is now a national emergency. The Prime Minister has gone missing. The biggest search in Australian history was now underway, with over 300 volunteers, police divers, naval divers, you name it, came to try to save the Prime Minister, but any chance of finding him was thwarted by the waters. The search had continued on in the early morning the next day, changing the strategy to the search, but again, the waters still made it hard to actively search for Harold. A few days later, many of the searchers were being sent home, and the whole search was ultimately called off on the 5th of January in 1968, lasting for almost 3 weeks. After the incident, no one could ever be so certain of what actually happened to Harold. So what were some suggested conclusions? Official police statement from Victoria Police noted that Holt just simply drowned, and his body was devoured by fish and sharks. It seems a little too reasonable and logical for something like that to happen to a Prime Minister, don't you think? Good thing the boys in tinfoil stepped out and gave us their beliefs on what actually happened. Conspiracy 1. Harold Holt killed himself. Many believe that Harold was struggling mentally from both his political and personal life, but this theory is greatly debunked since reasonable observations of Holt saw he was his normal self in the days before his disappearance. Plus, his wife had said in an interview that he was, to quote, too selfish to commit suicide. Conspiracy 2. The CIA killed Harold. It's not a true conspiracy if the CIA aren't involved. The conspiracy goes that Harold had intended to pull Australia out of the Vietnam War, and the CIA chose to step in to assassinate him. Conspiracy 3. Harold Holt was a Chinese spy. This theory came to surface 15 years after his disappearance in the book The Prime Minister Was a Spy, which detailed how Harold was secretly a Chinese spy He chose to fake his death in order to defect to China. But how did he get rescued by the Chinese? Simple. He was taken by Chinese combat divers and put into a submarine waiting nearby. There's a few other smaller scale theories, like how he faked his death to be with a secret lover, but that's just Hollywood's cliches. Now, to wrap the video up, his funeral was attended by thousands, with leaders from the democratic part of the world at least. And finally, his name is forever immortalised in Australian fashion. He is remembered by the Holt Memorial Swimming Centre. I guess the chances of a Prime Minister being drowned was low, but it wasn't zero. Anyway, that's a riveting tale of Holt's disappearance. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.